I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
Welcome, everyone, to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by our great friends of the North Carolina Pork Council. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I'm Chris Edwards. Great to be back with my guy, DG, here in year 2 of our quickly growing North Carolina Sports Network. On our weekly show here in 2024, DG and I are mostly going to look ahead at the upcoming week's college football matchups. We'll also discuss some of college football's biggest headlines and take a quick glance back to the previous week in college football with DG's expert analysis on the biggest games and developments from that week. David, now in his 38th year covering college football, both here in North Carolina and around the Atlantic Coast Conference. DG, good to be with you again.
It's great to be with you, Chris. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Let's dive right in. We'll, of course, get to some of the biggest developments from last weekend, which included some important victories for Duke and East Carolina, some rough losses for App State, NC State, and Wake Forest for sure. But first, let's look ahead to this week's action. Here in Week 12, a few intriguing storylines involving in-state teams, so let's get to those right off the bat. This segment brought to you by our good friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more at AtlanticTireOnline.com. DG, we'll start with the big one at Kenan Stadium this week. 4-5 Wake Forest at 5-4 North Carolina. 8 o'clock Saturday night in Chapel Hill. Tar Heels open as an 11-point favorite.
Yeah, this has been a lopsided rivalry in favor of the Tar Heels dating all the way back to the 1880s. All time, Carolina has won about 2/3 of these head-to-head games against Wake Forest. And more recently, Carolina has won 4 of the past 5 matchups, usually in pretty entertaining, high-scoring affairs. The Heels' 3 consecutive victories in this series have been by scores of 59-53, 58-55, and 36-34. So definitely high scoring, but also nail biters that could have gone either way. UNC's last 2 games, the dominating road victories over Virginia and Florida State, were probably the Tar Heels' 2 most complete games of the season. On defense, the return of the edge rusher Kamen Rucker from injury has been absolutely huge. It is not easy for any single player on an 11-man defensive unit to make such an enormous difference, but that is exactly what Rucker has done this season. In Carolina's best defensive games of the season, against Minnesota way back in the opener, but also UVA and FSU, Rucker was among those leading the way with sacks and other big plays. In Carolina's defensive meltdowns, remember the giving up the 70-burger to James Madison, losing that 20-0 second-half lead at Duke, also giving up pretty big numbers to Pitt and Georgia Tech. Kamen Rucker in those 4 games either played only a handful of snaps or did not play at all. That's the stark contrast in the Heels with and without Rucker. Offensively, meanwhile, the running back All-American Omarion Hampton has been a stud all season. But the 5th-year senior quarterback, Jacoby Criswell, who remember started as the Tar Heels' 3rd stringer way back in August, he's gradually become much more efficient in the passing game behind that inexperienced offensive line that has gradually gotten better this season. On the other side, Wake Forest is at risk of missing the postseason for the 2nd straight season after setting that school record with 7 straight bowl trips under Coach Dave Clawson. The Demon Deacons still have to deal with a road trip to Miami, remember. So at 4-5, if they want to get to 6 wins and an automatic bowl eligibility status this year, they're almost certainly going to have to beat both the Heels on Saturday in Chapel Hill and Duke later this year in Winston-Salem in that regular season finale. As we've said all season, the Deacs have a very capable, even explosive offense. Quality players at quarterback in Hank Bachmeier, running back in Damon Claiborne, wide receiver in Taylor Morin. The Deacs just have not been able to stop or sometimes even slow down their opponents consistently. They're next to last in the ACC in scoring defense at 33 points per game. So they're going to need to create turnovers on defense and put up a big number offensively if they're going to upset the Heels at Kenan Stadium.
Game 2 this week, the second straight week that East Carolina has a Thursday game. This time the Pirates on the road. They can get to bowl eligibility with a win in this game, DG. They're 5-4, East Carolina is, visiting 3-6 Tulsa. Again, a Thursday game, 7:30, primetime slot on ESPN. Pirates, a 14-point road favorite.
Yeah, the Pirates of the interim head coach, Blake Harrell, put on that offensive fireworks display last Thursday on national TV when they obliterated FAU 49-14. And our Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus was actually there to be a part of the festivities. That game was on ESPN2, and this matchup at Tulsa, as you mentioned, Chris, on Thursday night, is on the marquee channel, ESPN, with a great possibility of more very entertaining offense for an entire nation of college football fans to enjoy. After about a year and a half of truly brutal quarterback play, which ultimately got Mike Houston fired in Greenville earlier this season, the Pirates seem to have finally found their stride with Michigan State transfer Caton Hauser at quarterback. And Tulsa, by the way, is dead last in the American Athletic Conference in scoring defense, with the Golden Hurricane giving up an average of more than 38 points per game. If someone wrote a book about Mike Houston's 6-year tenure in Greenville, one of the most important chapters would have to be about the importance of, but also the Pirates' ultimate mismanagement of, the quarterback position. When Houston was hired by ECU before the 2019 season, he inherited a rising sophomore in Holton Ahlers, who was a heck of a player for the Pirates and ultimately fell just a hair short of making an NFL regular season roster. With Holton Ahlers at QB, the Pirates kept improving during those first 4 seasons under Mike Houston, and they even earned those back-to-back bowl invitations in 2021 and 2022. Then the bottom fell out completely. The Pirates had the worst QB play in the entire nation last year, not an exaggeration. And with that Miami/Missouri transfer, Jake Garcia, at the controls earlier this season, under the new offensive coordinator, John David Baker from the SEC, the Pirates actually did make some strides, but they still turned the ball over a ton, and they just couldn't seem to hit on all cylinders. So finally, Mike Houston did start the redshirt sophomore Caton Hauser. He had only been a backup at Michigan State these last 2 years, at undefeated Army back on October 19th. The Pirates did lose that game, but that was mainly because they couldn't stop Army's triple option offense. Hauser played fairly well against the nationally ranked Black Knights, and then he threw 5 touchdown passes in ECU's 56-34 win over Temple. And then, most recently, he had by far the best game of his entire college career. That was last Thursday in that 49-14 victory over Florida Atlantic, completing 17 of his 22 passing attempts for 343 yards, 5 more touchdown passes, and this time no interceptions. That is about as good as it gets. And now Hauser and the Pirates have another great opportunity to strut their stuff against a struggling Tulsa defense that has been giving up huge numbers all season long.
How about this one for a third game? Number 19 ranked Carson Newman. We're going to the D2 ranks. Carson Newman, 9-1. They're visiting number 23 Wingate, ever how you pronounce it. They're 8-1. This is Saturday, 3 o'clock, South Atlantic Conference Championship game right here in our backyard at Irwin Belk Stadium. No line on this game, by the way.
Yeah, for anyone wondering why we're picking this, as Chris so often reminds our statewide and beyond audience, we have 33 NCAA football programs here in the great state of North Carolina. And as we speak, Chris, Wingate/Wingate, school officials have told us either is acceptable as a pronunciation. Wingate is the only one of the 33 with what I will call a direct path to a conference championship here in the 2024 season. There are a couple of others who could share a regular season title, aka a first place finish in the conference standings in a league that does not have a conference title game format. But those teams need someone else to lose a game to make that even a possibility. So rather than dwelling on the negatives, what kind of football state do we have? 1 out of 33 in these sorts of ugly numbers. We're going to focus on the positive, and that is Wingate's shot at what would be just its third outright South Atlantic Conference championship in football in the history of that program. For those who do not know, Division II teams do complete their regular season here in mid-November, and then there's that huge 28-team Division II playoff format that begins next weekend. So Wingate should be part of that too, no matter what happens in this conference title game this Saturday. The Bulldogs' opponent is Carson Newman, a school that has captured more South Atlantic football titles than any other program by far. Lenore-Rhine is second on that list, a program from our backyard. And this year's Carson Newman Eagles are 9-1. They were also the team that handed 8-1 Wingate its only loss of the season to this point. That was a nail-biter, 31-28 in overtime, a thriller played back in September, and that one was on Carson Newman's home field in Jefferson City, Tennessee. This one, as Chris said, is on Wingate's home field in Wingate, North Carolina, which is real close to Charlotte, just a little bit to the east. This game is at Irwin Belk Stadium, which hosted our Old North State tailgate earlier this season. And by all accounts, this game is viewed as a very even matchup, despite the lack of a line we have under the first-year head coach. And that's fun to say, right? A first-year head coach has his team in the conference title game. His name is Rashawn Jordan. He's very familiar to the fans of that program. He was Wingate's longtime defensive coordinator, and I mean more than a decade. And the Bulldogs have played their best defense in a long time, the best defense in the South Atlantic Conference this season. They're giving up, Chris, less than 10 points per game for the year, which is just an incredible number at any level of football in the modern era. Carson Newman, though, and that's what part of what makes this matchup so fun, best scoring defense Wingate, best scoring offense in the South Atlantic this year was Carson Newman at about 36 points per game. So it's going to be strength versus strength when the Eagles have the ball. As a state, we certainly do not want to go 0 for 33 in the pursuit of conference championships this season. So I personally, and maybe Chris as well, I am unabashedly rooting for the Bulldogs to come away with a victory in this one.
And by the way, if you're looking for a line on this game, you're just a different level than everybody else. Just so you know. Before we wrap up this opening segment, DG, give me a game involving at least one in-state team that's maybe worth more of a brief mention this week.
I think, by the way, that's where we're supposed to have that 800, Gamblers Anonymous number available or running at the bottom of our screen.
That's right.
Yes. Only one game to mention, but I think it's important because it's another big picture story happening in our state in college football. So Howard visits NC Central. This is a Friday night game on ESPNU. It's the last game of the season at home, which means it's senior day for the Eagles of North Carolina Central. Central still does have a shot to tie what would be their third consecutive MEAC title, counting ties. This one's worth mentioning for a few reasons. First, the ESPNU game on a Friday night, so it's another chance, national TV spotlight for the Eagles to get more exposure than they do on a typical week-to-week basis. Second, Central has that chance. The MEAC does not have a championship game in football. So whoever finishes in first place in the conference standings is considered the champion, or if there's a tie, co-champions. If the Eagles beat Howard this week and then the worst team in the league, Delaware State, next weekend, and the Eagles get some help, South Carolina State has to lose to someone along the way down the stretch, then Central and South Carolina State would share the MEAC title, and that would be the third straight year that the Eagles were at the least co-champions of the MEAC. Finally, with it being the last home game of the season for Central, which means it is senior night, as I said, both head coach Trey Oliver and any seniors who have been there for their entire career should be really proud that they have been part of a special time in NC Central football history. They were part of the 2022 HBCU National Championship. They were part of last year NC Central's first ever appearance in the FCS playoff bracket. And now here in 2024, there is at least that possibility I outlined of a third consecutive MEAC co-championship as well. So good luck to the Eagles on Friday night as they pursue that combination of goals and as they continue really an exciting stretch in Central football history.
All right, stay with us. We'll have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council, right after this on the North Carolina Sports Network.
The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by three actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up. Whether you are moving locally, nationally, or even internationally, and whether you're a residential or commercial customer, please consider our friends at XL Moving and Storage, an award-winning Allied Van Lines agent with offices in Greensboro and Raleigh. Thanks to their 25 years of experience helping North Carolinians all across the state with their moving and storage needs, XL has become the trusted hometown North Carolina moving services company. Our good friends Jim Dorsett and Jody Hatley, along with their hardworking staff, offer customized, tailored relocation and storage solutions to the people of North Carolina and beyond. Visit them online today at xlms.com. That's EXCELMS.com.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by our friends at the North Carolina Port Council. Diving right into our ACC and National Week 12 look-ahead, brought to you by our friends at XL Moving and Storage, a family-owned Allied Van Lines partner here in North Carolina with 25 years of award-winning experience that can help you with your move to North Carolina, within North Carolina, or away from North Carolina, even internationally, while also assisting with your storage needs. Learn more at EXCELMS.com. That's XL Moving and Storage. Only two ranked-on-ranked matchups this week on the entire Week 12 national schedule, DG. Both happen to be in the Southeastern Conference, no real surprise there. So we'll begin there with that all-SEC clash between two top 11 teams in the national rankings. We're also going to mix in a game involving ACC teams that still have some playoff hopes too. So we'll start between the hedges, where number 6 Tennessee leaves Rocky Top. The Volunteers 8-1 at 7-2 Georgia, number 11 this week. This is the Saturday night game on ABC. Georgia coming off that loss at Ole Miss last week. Bulldogs do open up as a 10-point favorite in Athens.
Yeah, both the Tennessee part and the Georgia part of this matchup are intriguing to me for different reasons. First, the Volunteers seem to be right on the cusp of being nationally relevant in a way that has not happened often since Coach Philip Fulmer, remember, led them to the national championship back in 1998, but ultimately was fired, Fulmer, a decade later in 2008. Since Philip Fulmer, Tennessee has had only one season with 10 or more victories and only one season that ended in the national top 10. Both of those things, along with an Orange Bowl victory, happened during an 11-2 campaign in 2022, just 2 years ago, in what was then Coach Josh Heupel's second season in Knoxville. Now the Volunteers have a chance at something special again, including a shot at the SEC championship, something they have not won since that national title season of 1998. right now, the only one-loss teams in the SEC standings are Tennessee, Texas, and Texas A&M. And remember, the Aggies and the Longhorns have to play each other later this regular season. So those are the only 3 SEC teams that basically have their future entirely in their own hands. But it certainly will not be easy for the Volunteers, who have been kind of up and down offensively this season, great on defense. And they are a 10-point underdog in Athens on Saturday night, as Chris mentioned. The Georgia half of this matchup is fascinating to me, too. This is Coach Kirby Smart's 9th season with the Bulldogs. He won the national championship, of course, in both 2021 and 2022 at a school whose most recent national title prior to that was way back in 1980 when a legendary running back named Herschel Walker was leading the way. If the 12-team version of the college football playoff had been in place during the entirety of Kirby Smart's tenure, those first 8 years with the Dogs, his teams would have made the field 7 consecutive times, which is just incredible to think about. His only miss would have been in 2016 during that first year, kind of a rebuilding campaign on the job, after Kirby Smart was, of course, Nick Saban's defensive coordinator at Alabama for a really long time. Here in 2024, though, the Bulldogs are actually hanging by a thread in the national picture. They've already lost twice at Alabama and then, as Chris mentioned, at Ole Miss just last week. And it's going to be really difficult, not impossible, but very difficult for any team to make this expanded playoff with 3 losses. Remember the rule of thumb that we had with the 4-team version of the playoff? That was that you wouldn't get in if you lost twice. And in fact, over a full decade, there was no 2-loss team that ever made it into the 4-team version of the college football playoff. I do think we are going to see at some point a 3-loss team make this expanded playoff at some point, but I don't think this Georgia team could be that exception. So the Bulldogs better win out. To this point, the Dogs have only played 4 tough teams: Clemson, Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss. And they are only 2-2 in those 4 most challenging games. If you lose to the Vols as well, on Georgia's home field no less, that should be the end of their playoff hopes. You can't be 2-3 against your tougher opponents and expect to get the benefit of the doubt. If the Dogs can win out, on the other hand, then they would have one of the more compelling 10-2 resumes out there in the entire country because of those victories against the likes of Clemson and Texas.
All right, turning our focus now to the ACC, another elimination game as it relates to the 12-team playoff, perhaps an elimination game for the ACC championship too. 17th ranked Clemson, 7-2 at 7-2 Pitt. This is noon Saturday. ESPN Tigers a 10-point favorite in the Steel City.
Yeah, this game's going to be an interesting litmus test for Clemson in my eyes for a couple different reasons. First, the Tigers have played only 2 above-average opponents so far this season. They got whacked 34-3 by Georgia in that season opener. And they also lost 33-21 to Louisville at Death Valley. If you listen to the names of the 7 teams that Clemson has defeated, and listen up: App State, NC State, Stanford, Florida State, Wake Forest, Virginia, and Virginia Tech, you will realize that there is not a high-quality victim anywhere to be found in that lot. At 7-2, Pitt offers a chance for Clemson to post its best win of the season, especially with the Tigers being on the road in this one. Number 2, consider this striking contrast. From 2011 through 2020, a full decade, if there had been, again, this newly expanded version of the college football playoff in place at the time, Coach Dabo Swinney's Clemson Tigers would have made that playoff 9 times in that 10-year period. 7 times as the ACC champion, twice as an at-large selection. Compare that to these past 4 years when the Tigers would have made this format hypothetically only once. That was 2 years ago when the Tigers were the ACC champion. This year's Clemson squad is not entirely out of the picture, as Chris mentioned, for either the ACC championship game or the college football playoff, although because of tiebreakers, the Tigers do need either Miami or SMU to slip up down the stretch if they're going to make it to Charlotte for that ACC title game. Obviously, if the Tigers sneak into that title game against an SMU or Miami and they win it, well, they can punch their ticket to the playoff that way. But if they fall short of the ACC title game, there's at least a chance they could be an intriguing at-large candidate for the playoff, but only if they beat Pitt at Pitt this week, and then they take care of South Carolina in Death Valley in the regular season finale. Right now, the Gamecocks are 6-3. Chris mentioned the Panthers are 7-2. Gamecocks under Shane Beamer are maybe playing their best football of his tenure. They're ranked number 23 nationally as we speak, with the Tigers right now at number 17 in the AP poll. They have a chance to creep up toward the national top 10 if, again, and only if, they can go from 0 quality wins to 2 quality wins by taking out both the Panthers this week on the road and then the Gamecocks later at home. With just one more Clemson loss, though, in any of these games, the Tigers will finish outside the national top 10 for the 4th year in a row, and that's after they finished in the national top 10 for the 6 previous years in a row. So the conversation around Dabo Swinney would only get louder if the Tigers struggle down the stretch.
You mentioned SMU a moment ago. That Mustangs now number 14 in the polls this week. They're 8-1 at home against 5-4 Boston College. 3:30 Saturday on ESPN. Mustangs maybe the inside track now to get to Charlotte for that ACC championship. Business still to take care of for SMU, though. They open up as a 17-point favorite at home over Boston College.
Yeah, since SMU is new to the Atlantic Coast Conference this year, I want to offer some quick background to the Mustangs story because it has become, I think, one of the most remarkable in all of college football over these past couple of seasons. This is a program that, since it was hit by the NCAA's so-called death penalty for a bunch of really extreme rules violations back in the 1980s, this program has changed its conference affiliation since that time and that controversy 4 times over the past 4 decades. So first, remember, the Southwest Conference just imploded in the mid-1990s. The wild, wild west of college sports disbanded as a league. So the Mustangs joined the Western Athletic Conference at that point. Then in 2005, they jumped from the WAC to Conference USA. In 2013, they joined the newly created at the time American Athletic Conference. And of course, earlier this year, they became official members of the ACC. During that tumultuous period, in the aftermath of SMU's glory days and even national championship caliber teams when they had the Pony Express with running backs Eric Dickerson and Craig James in the earlier 1980s, the Mustangs actually were not even allowed to field a football team for a couple years as part of the death penalty's aftermath in the later 1980s. And eventually, they went almost 40 consecutive years without having a single season where they ended up in the national top 25. That is as incredibly steep and as lengthy a fall from the proverbial mountaintop of college football as there has been in the history of the sport. So fast forward to today. Under their 3rd-year head coach, Rhett Lashley, a former Miami Hurricanes assistant, SMU had its first top 25 campaign in 39 years just this past season, when the Mustangs went 11-3, captured the American Athletic Conference Championship in their final season in that league. Now, here in their first season in the ACC, they will play in this new league's championship game as long as they can win out against a very manageable remaining schedule. 5-4 Boston College this week, at 5-4 Virginia next week, hosting 5-4 California in Dallas to finish the regular season. If the Mustangs go 11-1, which seems very attainable, I believe they'll end up in the college football playoff whether or not they win the ACC title game. Why? Because it's important to remember that their only current loss is to BYU, which is 9-0 right now and ranked number 7 in the AP poll. That's about as quality a loss as you can find, right? And if hypothetically you lost to Miami in the ACC title game, your 2 losses would both be to high-quality opponents. Meanwhile, the Mustangs' best wins do include at Louisville, good team, nationally ranked as we speak, at Duke, good team, could end up in the national rankings, and against Pittsburgh, which has spent a lot of the season in the national rankings as well. All 3 of those teams have spent a lot of time in the top 25 this year if they're not in it currently. This SMU squad is not a fluke. It is number 2 in the ACC in scoring offense at about 40 points per game. And the Mustangs are number 2 in the ACC in scoring defense at about 22 points per game. That is a well-rounded squad. The Mustangs can run the ball. They can stop the run. They are not elite offensively, just as we say Miami was not elite defensively, and it would come back to haunt the Hurricanes as it did. Mustangs are not elite offensively, despite some of those numbers I mentioned, but they're very good on defense, really solid on special teams. They have to get to 11-1 and the ACC title game to make this a true dream season, but they have everything it takes to get there, especially with their most difficult regular season games already behind them.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back and have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council, right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a tangy slushie, a fun crowd, or just a taste of the good life at the beach, Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach is the place for you. Located on North Lumina Avenue, just 1 block from the sand and waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Jimmy's features a full bar with nightly beer and drink specials, and it hosts musical performers almost every day of the year. One more fun fact, Jimmy's annual Children's Bike Drive, which started in 2017, now distributes more than 1,000 bicycles and helmets per year to young people in the Wilmington area and beyond. Jimmy's Bar, your home away from home on Lumina Avenue in Wrightsville Beach. I am a better person and a more effective business owner for having known and learned from Emily Parks over many years now. Emily's company, Organize for Success, helps multi-passionate business owners and executives bring harmony to all the layers of their lives, from work to side projects, from friends and family to hobbies, community, and beyond. With Emily's help, you too can make every minute matter. She helps you determine what earns your time and how to efficiently accomplish what matters. One of the many things I love about Emily is that she does not impose her will on her clients. She listens to them. That way she can better help them cultivate the lives they want to live. You can set up a complimentary call with Emily today by visiting organizeforsuccess.com.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council. Diving right into our coaches and quarterback segment, brought to you by our great friends at Lawson Insurance, who earlier this month celebrated their family-owned business's 50th anniversary of helping DG and many other North Carolina citizens and businesses with their personal and commercial insurance needs. You can reach out to the brothers Ken Miller and Michael Lawson, like all of us, huge sports fans. Give them a call, 919-846-2090, or search Lawson Insurance online. DG, we're keeping the focus on coaches this week because it is that time of the year when the best coaching jobs, sometimes rewarded with the Coach of the Year honors and the most disappointing seasons, might lead to some hard conversations at the end of the year. So we'll start here among the 7 FBS head coaches in our state. Mike Houston at ECU has already lost his job in the midseason. We know that. How many more coaching changes do you expect to see with our other 6 FBS programs by the time we get to the end of the season?
Yeah, I think the most likely answer is 1, but it could go higher. Sean Clark of App State is the most likely candidate for dismissal, especially after his team's 38-24 loss at Coastal Carolina last Thursday night. This year's Mountaineers now have 5 double-digit defeats. 66-20 at Clemson, remember, was an embarrassment. Probably even more embarrassing, 48-14 at home to that mediocre South Alabama squad on national TV earlier this year. That was just a brutal nail in the coffin. The Mountaineers have had 3 additional double-digit losses on the road this year at Marshall, at Louisiana, and most recently at Coastal. As we've discussed, Chris, on previous shows, if Coach Clark ends up with his second poor season in these past 3 years, which right now appears very likely, given the Mountaineers' 4-5 record and 2 more very difficult games after this week's open date, I don't think he'll see year 6 as the head coach in Boone. It's a very difficult situation because Coach Clark is a great guy. That is his own alma mater. But App State won or shared 4 straight Sun Belt titles from 2016 through 2019. 3 of those under Scott Satterfield, now at Cincinnati as a Big 12 head coach. 1 of those under Eli Drinkwitz in his only year in Boone. He, of course, now a head coach at Missouri in the Southeastern Conference. The Mountaineers have had only 2 non-winning seasons in the last 30 years, and 1 of those was under Coach Clark just 2 years ago. Now it could be 3 in the last 30 years, with 2 of them being under Coach Clark. There is a very high standard in Boone, North Carolina for football, and barring an incredible finish this year against 2 of the better teams in the Sun Belt Conference, James Madison travels to Boone. That group beat the Tar Heels with that 70-burger in Chapel Hill. Georgia Southern is in position maybe to play in the Sun Belt title game, and that arch rival matchup is in Georgia this time rather than at home for the Mountaineers. The Mountaineers look very, very likely to fall short of that very high standard for the second time in these last 3 years. There are a lot of schools here in North Carolina where you definitely can get away with a couple of mediocre records. At App State, in the sport of football, you cannot, and that is why Sean Clark has one of the hotter seats in all of FBS football right now. Quickly elsewhere, because I get these emails and tweets all the time, I know there are complaints about Dave Doran at NC State, especially after that home loss to Duke. Even Mac Brown at North Carolina, even Dave Clawson at Wake Forest, with the Demon Deacons likely to miss the postseason for the second year in a row. Each of those situations is unique, but first, Wake's administrators know that they have one of the best coaches in the history of the program, so there is absolutely no hot seat conversation in Winston-Salem. I can promise you that. At Carolina, Mac Brown just had his Tar Heels play their 2 most complete games of the season in those dominating victories at UVA and at FSU, and he still has a shot at an 8-4 season. So as we've said all along, it's going to be his choice whether he stays as a guy who will be 74 years old next summer. If he ends up with 8 wins, or, if you win your bowl game, you could even end up with 9 wins at this point. If he struggles a little bit down the stretch, who knows what happens? But at least for now, Mac Brown has changed that conversation. And finally, at NC State, I know many fans are frustrated with Dave Doran, but the guy has a $15 million buyout. He's had top 25 seasons in 2 of the last 4 years, and he needs only 1 more victory to get to his 10th bowl invitation in the last 11 years. There probably will be some staff changes in Raleigh during the offseason, maybe an offensive coordinator and elsewhere. But that total set of circumstances that I just described, including a $15 million buyout at a school and an athletic department that is not overflowing with cash, those add up to a very highly unlikely scenario of there being a head coaching change in Raleigh this year.
All right, let's think back to the summer. You remember we had the Olympics and we all love America and we're going to win all the gold medals, okay? So let's keep that thought in mind as I ask you this question. If I offered you an Olympic podium right now and you could pick in-state coaches at any level of college football in our state, who would be the candidates for gold, silver, and bronze based on how their team has performed so far this year?
All right, I will give you 3, but first let me just say that I'm not ready to stop taking applications for this in-state Coach of the Year honor just yet. I will give the Olympic-style podium honorees in a minute, but there is still a lot of football left to be played at some levels that we follow. If, for example, UNC's Mac Brown were to defy the odds, win all 3 of his remaining regular season games, get to that 8-4, and then win that bowl game, that would be, I think, worthy of Coach of the Year consideration, given, and I mean statewide, not ACC Coach of the Year,
sure,
given that the Tar Heels were 3-4 not long ago, and it looked as if the season might get away from them entirely. Now, obviously, if it's at 7-6 or something, Mac Brown would not be a candidate for this award. But at 9-4, he absolutely would be a candidate. Similarly, if our state ends up with an FCS team or a Division II squad that makes a long run in those very large playoff brackets at those levels, then that coach and that team suddenly becomes a candidate for our various postseason honors as well. In many contexts, including, say, my official ACC Coach of the Year vote, in a lot of contexts, these sorts of votes and awards are handed out at the end of the regular season. But the way we do things here at the North Carolina Sports Network, we wait for the entirety of the season to be completed before handing out our Team of the Year, or Season of the Year, we call it, and Coach of the Year, because we think that those later results and postseason results matter an awful lot for these purposes. All that said, the Olympic podium guys right now include Manny Diaz of Duke, Rashawn Jordan of Wingate, and Maurice Flowers of Johnson C. Smith. You and I have been talking about that J.C. Smith story all season, or at least for more than a month now at this point. Unfortunately, and I forget, Chris, do you believe in broadcaster jinxes?
Oh, yeah.
Remember.
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Oh, yeah.
I will feel so horrible if we jinxed the Golden Bulls with the love we've given them over the last month or so, because after that 8-0 start that had truly the best season in program history in the crosshairs, in a program that was created in the late 1800s, unfortunately, the Golden Bulls lost both of their final 2 regular season games, so they're not even in the conference title matchup, which is a disappointing ending to an otherwise great season. But given what Maurice Flowers inherited 3 years ago, 8-2 is an insanely impressive step in the right direction. So he's going to be on the podium. Rashawn Jordan, we mentioned Wingate. He's in his first year as the head coach there, and they're playing this Saturday for the South Atlantic Conference Championship. In our state, if you get a conference title, you are at the very least a candidate for our statewide Coach of the Year honor. He hasn't won it yet, but just getting to that title game in his first year as a head coach is a heck of an accomplishment. And finally, Manny Diaz, and I'm not sure of the order of these guys yet because there's still games to play, but Manny Diaz has the Blue Devils 7-3 after very low expectations in the aftermath of the coaching change from Mike Elko, who took off for Texas A&M last winter. Manny Diaz lost a bunch of dudes to the portal through no fault of his own, just the timing of his hiring, and didn't have a lot of time to add from the portal, given the timing of his hiring. Somehow, some way, the guy is 7-3, has a chance to be 9-3, which means you have a chance to finish with 10 wins, which has only been done one time in the history of Duke football. So those are my guys: Manny Diaz, Rashawn Jordan, and Maurice Flowers. Still football to play, but those are the front runners to end up on our Olympic coaching podium this year.
All right, let's take one more time out. We'll come back and wrap things up with DG on This Week in College Football at Daily Glen, presented by the North Carolina Port Council.
The Original Salt Works has become a legendary breakfast, brunch, and lunch place in Wilmington for both locals and out-of-town visitors over the last 50-plus years. Our good friend Bob Hubbard owns the place, but he's also the one cooking your food and often roaming the dining room to greet you with a smile and to make sure your visit is a great one. Bob has been running the show at this unique roadside diner for more than 20 years now, and he and his friendly, hardworking staff aim to treat you like one of their own. Try Bob's homemade omelets or special recipe grits for breakfast, or his legendary cheeseburgers for lunch. The Original Salt Works, your breakfast and lunch choice on Oleander Drive in Wilmington. King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach is the longest running restaurant in New Hanover County. That's since 1947, and it recently was renovated to an impeccable degree by our good friends Jimmy Galeese and his amazing wife Keaton. Their outstanding chefs offer fresh local seafood, salad options, and creative, tasty variations of pork, beef, and poultry dishes. King Neptune has always been a great choice for dinner and or drinks, and now it's open for lunch and brunch too. Check out the lunch, brunch, and dinner menus at neptuneswb.com. That's Neptunes with an S, then WB for Wrightsville Beach. Again, the King Neptune Restaurant website is neptuneswb.com.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by our friends at the North Carolina Port Council. Now, the focus of our show this week in college football is going to be forward-looking as often as possible, but we will always take a glance back to the previous weekend in college football, too. So with that thought in mind, we bring you our quick glance back to Week 11, brought to you by our great friends at Jimmy's Bar and King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach. Jimmy's has a full bar, nightly drink specials, and live music 365 days a year. And right next door, King Neptune has become one of the best restaurants in the entire greater Wilmington area. You can keep up with Jimmy's on Facebook and learn more about King Neptune Restaurant at neptuneswb.com. Week 11, DG gave us some intriguing developments beyond those we've already talked about, which include some games that we talked about on our show last week, like ECU's win over FAU in Greenville last Thursday, Duke's big win on the road at NC State, Wake Forest, a home loss to Cal, App State losing on the road, as we mentioned, to Coastal Carolina, and that Johnson C. Smith loss on the road to Livingstone. So with that thought in mind, we got to find some good here to wrap up the show, okay? We got to end on a high note. Give me a team, a coach, a player, something that's worthy of a shout-out as we wrap it up today.
Yeah, Chris, you know I'm not great at short answers, but the evidence in front of me suggests a relatively short answer, unfortunately. And for the record, a lot of our teams across North Carolina had an open week last week, and a lot of our other teams lost. So there's only so much to choose from. But let me give Manny Diaz some more credit in more specific way. I was there at the Duke State game watching from the press box at Carter Finley Stadium. When you have mostly evenly matched teams, I believe that's when coaching matters the most. And the one area where Duke had to put maximum pressure on NC State was with the Duke defense that we've praised all along, going against the true freshman quarterback, C.J. Bailey of NC State. Duke executed that plan. Duke frustrated the Wolfpack offensively. All of that is easier said than done because remember, C.J. Bailey was a true freshman when he had the three best games of his college career against the likes of Syracuse and Cal, et cetera, right? So what those others could not figure out in a way to slow true freshman quarterback C.J. Bailey of the Wolfpack, Duke did figure out. I mean, the Wolfpack got frustrated. Their receivers were dropping balls. The offensive line got frustrated. C.J. Bailey got confused by what he was seeing when he looked down the field. That's not accidental. Duke's defense, thanks to great coaching and great execution by those players, Chandler Rivers at cornerback, Alex Howard and Ozzie Nicholas and others at linebacker, Vincent Anthony and Kendi Charles and others on the line. Those guys are not only talents, man. They are taking the mental part, the preparation part, the execution part of defense to the next level. And they all deserve a lot of credit because talent-wise and experience-wise, it was a mostly even matchup in Raleigh. But because of the reasons I just outlined, it was Duke that came away with a pretty convincing victory. Two more quick shout-outs. Blake Harrell and his offensive staff at ECU. What was an ugly offense has become an interesting at worst, entertaining even better, and now prolific offense. Under an interim head coach, things can go sideways. Guys can give up on a season. Not only has that not happened, and the Pirates have strung together a couple of nice victories, the offense has taken off in a way that we just haven't seen for the last 2 years. So credit to all the offensive players. Obviously, Caton Hauser has made the most of his first full-time opportunity as a starter in his 3 years at the college level after 2 seasons at Michigan State. And Blake Harrell deserves credit for just keeping that locker room a healthy place as the interim head coach and longtime or fairly long-time defensive coordinator. Finally, a very quick shout-out. They've been out of the spotlight because of their record this year, but Elon, under our good friend Tony Trisciani, longtime head coach, former defensive coordinator of the Phoenix, they went to a nationally ranked William and Mary squad and came away with a top 25 road victory. We can't find enough shout-outs, but that was an impressive one from the FCS level to go with a fairly small sample size of other things worth celebrating across North Carolina college football this past week.
Hopefully more things to celebrate when we talk next week on this show. Thanks to our friends at the North Carolina Port Council for being the founding partner of the North Carolina Sports Network, and we welcome Atlantic Tire and Service with 6 locations now in the Triangle as our newest sponsor. A quick reminder, DG and his staff posting daily articles at our fast-growing website, ncsportsnetwork.com. That also has direct links on the homepage to this YouTube channel, the wide variety of places you can get on-demand audio and podcast of our show, The David Glenn Show, and all the other offerings, and also has updates on year 2 of our Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus, which had a lot of fun, both in Greenville and in Raleigh last week for East Carolina and NC State. And we'll be in Chapel Hill this week for the big rivalry game coming up later this month, I should say, between UNC and NC State. So for DG, I'm Chris Edwards. Thanks for joining us this week for This Week in College Football with David Glenn right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.